Հարգելի գործընկերներ, հարգելի ուսանողներ, այսօր մեր հյուրը մեր համալսարանի ասիական գրադարանի հյուրն է, պրոֆեսոր դոկտոր Պետեր Քամփիցը, նա աշխատում է Վիեննայի համալսարանում, փիլիսոփայության ֆակուլտետում, երկար տարիներ ղեկավարել է փիլիսոփայության ֆակուլտետը, եղել է դեկանը, բազմաթիվ միջազգային կազմակերպությունների անդամ է եւ նաեւ նախագահ, եղել է գրեթե բոլոր աշխարհամասերում զեկույցներ դասախոսությունները կարդացել, շատ աշխատություն, բազմաթիվ աշխատություններ էր, այդ թվում նաեւ Վիտգենշտայնի դրամասն այսօր մենք կտեսնենք։
So, welcome and thank you very much for this invitation and introduction. I have been asked to do my lecture now and the discussion in English. Is English okay for you?
Yes.
Armenian, unfortunately, I cannot speak, and my mother tongue is of course German, so I will try my best. Secondly, I have to apologize a little bit my voice. I have been coming in a very bad shape. I have a cold, and I hope that my voice will be able to carry on during my lecture. And Wittgenstein had, and this was a legend and some kind of a myth that was created afterwards, Wittgenstein had a very special life. He was born within 7 or 8 other children, and his father was a very rich man. His father has in the 19th century created the industry, the steel industry in Vienna, a very rich person and a very authoritative person. And the brothers and sisters of Wittgenstein has been a little bit suffering from the authority of his father. His father, of course, wished that the sons would continue his work, but the sons refused. And there was something very strange in the family. 3 of the brothers of Ludwig Wittgenstein committed suicide. One of them was a very famous pianist, and in the First World War he lost one of his arms. And he continued to play piano with one arm, and there were very famous companies doing something for him, for that he could fulfill compositions only with one arm. And Ludwig, who was the youngest one of this family, decided first to study engineering. And from engineering, he had developed some interest in mathematical questions. And from mathematics, he came to logical questions, and from logical questions, he came to philosophy. And he studied first in Germany, and then in England, where Bertrand Russell, who was at this time some kind of a very famous man in developing logics, was his tutor, and he had many, many discussions with Bertrand Russell. The last sentence is very typical. And I think he has been doing the consequences of this. He said in the last word of his Tractatus, what we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. And then he kept silence for several years. And what he did was very curious. Firstly, he wanted to become a monk, but the Catholic dogmatic didn't appeal to him, so he hadn't had a career of being a monk. And so he became a teacher for elementary schools, and for elementary schools far from Vienna, where the family had its residence, and where of course there was glory and there was richdom and whatever you want. But he retired and he went to little villages in the south of eastern Austria, which were at this time very underdeveloped. That means in a status where the people were very poor, there was some agriculture, but that was all. And there he taught for several years, but he did not succeed as a teacher. He was too nervous, and he had no way to get around with the child, so he gave it up. And in the 20s, he constructed a house in Vienna for his sister, which was very rich. Had the wish to have a house, and he constructed this house. You know it, Liane, you have been there. It has become very famous. It is a house which is constructed in a very modernist style, and it was called afterwards, it looks like frozen logic. The Viennese circle consisted of philosophers who were strictly against metaphysics, strictly against speculation in philosophy, strictly against dialectic and other methods, but have been restricted philosophy to critique of language, to philosophy in the sense of natural sciences, to empiricism, and finally, let me say, to logical analysis. And this Viennese circle, who was constructed in the 30s, who was being built up in the 30s of the last century, has become very famous and had a big influence on the philosophy in a global sense. That means in the philosophy, especially of the United States and especially of the English-speaking world. And Wittgenstein was connected and was interested a little bit in this developments. And he was never a member of the Viennese circle, but he was very close to them in his direction. And in the second period, he returned in the 30s to England. He went back to Cambridge, he became a teacher of philosophy, but in a certain way, he hated and he detested academic life. He said, if I become now a professor of philosophy, I will never do good things again. Finally, the reception in the continent, especially in Austria, had a certain retardedness. It means in the 60s and in the 70s, Wittgenstein has become a famous person, and there were many legends and many myths about him. And we have in Vienna, in the south of Lower Austria, where he has been teaching, we have each year a Wittgenstein symposium, where 200, 300, 400 people from all over the world are coming and discussing some of the theses of Wittgenstein. Well, in the field of philosophy, Wittgenstein had in his two periods, I have been mentioning already, in his two periods a big influence. Firstly, he was one of them who created that, what we call in the history of philosophy, the linguistic